In September of 1881, James A. Garfield lay on his deathbed, succumbing not only to the bullet of a deranged assassin, but also the ignorance of the physician presiding over his recovery. Only 6.5 months after becoming President of the United States, it seemed an untimely end for one of the Buckeye State's greatest sons. However, the path that would ultimately lead to this conclusion was far from obvious. Born into poverty in Orange Township, Ohio, now Moreland Hills, James A. Garfield would be the last of the log cabin presidents. After his father died when he was only 3 years old, he and his 4 older siblings were raised largely by their mother. From a young age, Garfield was fascinated by literature. This fascination with stories led him to become enthralled by the idea of becoming a sailor. At age 16, he set out for the port of Cleveland to find work, despite the protestations of his mother. He approached the single ship in port at the time, only to be lambasted by the disgruntled captain for being nothing more than a sea-struck youth. That same day, he settled for a job working on the Ohio-Erie Canal, which too ended in disaster when, after only a few weeks, he came down with a crippling illness, forcing him to return home to Orange Township. This would prove to be a defining moment in his life. With the urging of his mother, he forestalled his dreams of sailing the seas and instead pursued his formal education, enrolling at the Cuyahoga Seminary in Chester Township. He would later move to the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, now known as Hiram College, where he worked as a janitor in order to fund his education. Identified as a bright student, he was soon hired as a teacher of Greek at the institute, despite still being a student there. He received a degree from Williams College in Massachusetts in 1856, and, upon returning to Ohio in 1857, he became president of the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute. In 1859, he became involved with politics and was elected to serve as a Republican senator in the Ohio State Legislature. With the outbreak of war in 1861, Garfield offered his services to Governor William Dennison, believing the war to be a holy crusade. Though lacking any military experience, he was eventually commissioned to the non-existent 42nd Ohio Infantry Regiment, tasked with filling its ranks. While serving, he would participate in the Battle of Middle Creek, Shiloh, the Siege of Corinth, and Chickamauga. In 1862, while still serving in the military, Garfield was offered the opportunity to run for Congress in his home district. He agreed under the condition that he would not have to personally campaign. He won the election, and in December of 1863, Garfield left his military career bound for Washington. As a radical Republican, he pressed for aggressive action against rebel Southerners, complete abolition, and black suffrage, among other issues. He would serve in Congress until 1880, whereupon he was elected senator from Ohio. However, he would never enter the Senate. In June of 1880, Garfield attended the highly contentious Republican National Convention in Chicago. None of the leading candidates for the Republican presidential nomination, James G. Blaine, Ulysses S. Grant, or John Sherman, were able to garner enough votes to win the nomination. Garfield delivered an impassioned speech meant to upset the deadlocked ballots. Although he himself was not seeking the nomination, the delegates overwhelmingly began to cast their votes for him. Garfield won the nomination in Chicago and returned to his home in Mentor, where he would begin his front porch campaign. Despite a close popular vote, Garfield won the 1880 election. On March 4, 1881, the formerly impoverished man from Mentor was officially inaugurated President of the United States. However, this meteoric rise would not last long. Approximately 3.5 months after assuming office, Garfield was shot in the back by a disgruntled office seeker while waiting at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. On the floor of the train station, doctors hastily probed the president's wound with unwashed hands, searching unsuccessfully for the bullet. Garfield did not die immediately from the attempt on his life. He was placed under intensive care in Washington and was later moved to Elberon, New Jersey, hoping the fresh air would aid in his convalescence. However, on the night of September 19, 1881, President Garfield was seized by pains in his chest. At 10:35 p.m., James A. Garfield passed away. When word of the president's death hit newspaper headlines, the nation was sent again into shock and mourning. He was the second president in less than 2 decades to die by the hand of an assassin. His body was brought back to Washington, where it would lay in state for 2 days. Beneath the Capitol Rotunda, where Garfield had served for so many years, 70,000 mourners passed by his body. After this, his body was loaded onto a train car bound for Cleveland, Ohio. There, architects and laborers had been hard at work on Public Square, constructing a suitable catafalque and pavilion for the president. When Garfield's body arrived at 1:15 p.m., it was met by an entourage of civic and military organizations led by General James Barnett, who bore the president's remains to Public Square. At 9 the next morning, public viewing began, and it would continue throughout the day. The line to see the president's body was said to have extended all the way to the Viaduct Bridge. Illuminated by electric lights, even after nightfall and into the next morning, people continued to stream into the pavilion. The next day, at 9 a.m., the president's remains were placed aboard a specially designed funeral carriage and drawn slowly down the opulent Euclid Avenue, past columns of mourners towards Lakeview Cemetery, where he was to be buried. His body was interred temporarily in the family mausoleum of Levi T. Schofield. Schofield would later go on to design the Cuyahoga County Soldiers and Sailors Monument, wherein Garfield would be honored with a life-size bronze figure. On May 30th, 1890, Decoration Day, Garfield's mausoleum was dedicated and his remains removed to their final resting place. From his mausoleum, one can look out over northeast Ohio and see Lake Erie, where a young man from Orange Township was once rudely dissuaded from becoming a sailor. Although James A. Garfield is often remembered mainly for his tragic assassination, he is truly an inspirational figure in American history. Through his service to the nation, his sharp intellect, and his tireless pursuit of knowledge, he was able to transcend his humble beginnings in Orange Township and rise to the highest office in the land. In 1886, future President William McKinley said of Garfield, quote, "He did not flash forth as a meteor. He rose with measured and stately step over rough paths and through years of rugged work. His broad and benevolent nature made him a friend of all mankind."